Welcome to Building My Legacy podcast. This podcast is designed for leaders and entrepreneurs who want to leave a legacy and will provide strategies that focus upon key elements for legacy creation, determining your desired impact and its benefit, increasing your legacy's reach by engaging key stakeholders, planning, prioritizing, and executing. Here's your host, Dr. Lois Sonstegard.
Welcome, everybody, to our podcast today, Building My Legacy podcast. I have with me Celina Souffrant. She is a digital marketer, a brand developer. She works at content development and also impact management. She has worked in a variety of different places, which I think makes it very interesting for us because as you look at building your legacy, some of you will be looking at not-for-profits, building them. You're going to be looking at startup issues, and those issues may be different, especially if you've been leading a corporate environment. So, Celina, I'm going to let you introduce yourself, talk a little bit about your background, because you have such a rich and broad, deep background. So please share with the audience.
Sure. Thank you so much for having me on this podcast. I'm really excited to kind of talk about my journey because the thing that I've heard the most speaking to people is that it's really unconventional and it's inspirational in that you don't always have to do, the corporate 9-to-5 path if you want to build a legacy. If you're smart and if you're brave, you can honestly do whatever you want and still be successful. And that's really what I found in my journey, kind of pivoting along the way. And I actually started off as a performer. I was a singer for the first 2 decades of my life. It brought me to New York. I was doing postgraduate studies and really thought I was going to take the opera route until I got vocal nodules, which are like little calluses on your vocal cords where you can't sing anymore. So at that point, I kind of had to make a big career decision, where all of my undergraduate was in opera. I had moved to New York to pursue this career and really had to think, okay, am I going to do the surgery route and kind of stick with this, or do I want to take this as a message and maybe pivot? So I decided to do the latter and decided to get more into business because I ended up happening across this startup ad in Craigslist looking for initially models because I had also done a little bit of modeling and thought, well, this will give me a little bit of pocket change while I figure out my next step. And then ended up getting on famously with the founder. And he saw that, as a performer, I was a natural salesperson. And so he brought me on to oversee his B2B business to business kind of sales route. So that meant traveling across the country up to, 30, 40 days a year per season, summer and winter, dealing with large scale industry buyers in the fashion industry. So working with brands like Whole Foods or Macy's, national universities and museums, anyone who was really interested in our products. And that got me really to understand the inner workings of business and what it takes to grow a business from a sales perspective and, client management. How do you, position yourself and what is a value proposition? What is the value of understanding your customer before you sell to them? And you're not just selling based on your products, but actually on the customer's needs. So I was in that role for about 7 years and was able to grow a team, eventually moved over to kind of the social media and the web design side and learned how to transition what I was saying into written materials. And that was what opened up my eyes to marketing, and made me realize that while I am a natural salesperson, for me to scale my impact or for a company to really scale an impact and build their legacy, they have to have strategic marketing initiatives so that they can reach more people and grow their business. So, lived in that position, absolutely loved it. Started with, 3 members. We scaled up. We got into, multi-million-dollar revenues, and that was super successful. And it left me with that feeling of, I want more. It made me really hungry for that whole startup development and helping other people build their legacy and saying, how can I use my experience and my unique point of view and my skill sets to be able to scale impact around the world? So that took me to Germany, where I worked as a freelance consultant for a few years and was hired by a ton of different nonprofits, NGOs, basically anybody who, would fly me to wherever they were in the world and would feed me. And, we're really cool, mission-oriented organizations I would work with. So I was able to, work in Spain and in Italy and in Portugal and Vietnam, Thailand, Brazil, Guatemala, Honduras, all over the world. And that journey was so instrumental in me forming my view of myself and my business and made me realize that I can be successful on my own. I don't necessarily need to work for a larger organization and I can live a life by design. As long as I was intentional, with how I was establishing my business, how I was sourcing leads and finding clients, I was able to make it happen. So I did that for a few years and then got to a point where I wanted to go back to school and get my MBA because I kind of felt like I was at a cross points where I either could stay where I was going, or if I wanted to, again, kind of level up and take that next step in my career, I needed to get a little bit more institutional knowledge. So I moved back to California, where I live right now, and I got my MBA program and ended up transitioning to a career in corporate tech, where previously worked at Google. Now I'm at Facebook in a consulting capacity and just working with the marketing teams to help them, really scale out their impact across a bunch of different verticals. And along the way, it's just been such an interesting journey because, each role that I've taken on has required a different skill set, and it's allowed me to learn and grow, but still keeping the core values that I have as a person. That's really what's pushed me and propelled me forward. But I've been able to really, just experience so many new things because I haven't been afraid to try.
So, Celina, as you have gone through various different places, companies, industries, what do you see are the biggest challenges that startups have in terms of their growth?
Yeah, for sure. I've seen this a number of times, whether it's a nonprofit or if it's a for-profit business. The biggest thing is that lack of go-to-market strategy. And that's really where I developed that expertise because I kept seeing those gaps. Even before I knew what that meant, I saw that was what was inhibiting growth. It's people not understanding the market, not understanding the competition, and not having the proper internal, kind of strategies for growth in terms of their messaging and understanding how are we talking to our customers? How are we finding them? What are we doing for our supply chain if we're a product-based company to ensure that it's sustainable, that it's scalable? Are we thinking, 2, 3, 4 years down the road, or are we just thinking about tomorrow? And even having kind of that pivot strategy of, okay, as we're thinking about growing, what does that mean? Does that mean adding another product to our portfolio? Does it mean pivoting and adding a different line? Does it mean, adding an additional service? So, the companies that are the most successful I've found really have a mix of that long-term vision, but those short-term, everyday kind of benchmarks to make sure that they're on the way to success. And I definitely understand, I owned my own baking company for 2 years in New York, and I get what it's like to be a founder and to have 1,000 things thrown your way, and you're just trying to keep your head above the water, and you're like, thinking about next year, like, no way, I need to think about next month and making rent. But it's really important, whether you have outside help from a business consultant or whether you have a mentor or an advisor, someone to help you see that big picture so you're not just getting stuck in the small details.
Well, one of the things that I see happening with a lot of startups is your variable cost, well, actually, your fixed cost that becomes most problematic is your employees. It's the piece that you can't shrink it and grow it fast. And so you see people doing a lot of manipulating with that in order to be able to manage their bottom line. Right? So what are some of the go-to-market strategies if you're going to be a little bit more long-term than tomorrow or this month? You're looking at past that, shrinking employees to meet the bottom line this month, right? You got to keep them if you're going to grow.
Sure.
So what are some of your thoughts on that? How go-to-market is tough.
Yeah, and I think there's a couple of different factors that come into that. Again, whether you're service or product-based, you want to look at your unit economics. So let's just start with the product-based businesses. So when you're selling something, you need to understand your profitability and how much one unit costs before you can determine anything. So for example, if you're a baker and you're making donuts, you need to understand how much one donut costs, and you need to factor in not only the ingredients, but the operating costs like the rent, electricity, all of the things that go into actually the inputs to make the donut. Then you're thinking about sales costs, and if you need to hire staff, if you're selling at farmers markets, if you're going to rent a store, and then thinking about marketing costs to get your product out into the world. And so whenever I'm working with my clients, the first thing that I do in the go-to-market, after doing your market research, after studying the competition and identifying that your idea, you validated that it is a good idea, the second thing you need to do then is understand your cost structure so that you know how much you need to charge to be profitable. So that I think is a key component that people, before you think about hiring or scaling, you need to understand exactly what you're working with. And then you can kind of plan out a financial kind of analysis, right? And say, okay, if I sell X amount of products, I can break even in X months or X years. And I found that normally it takes, many companies aren't profitable right away, but the ones that do get profitable, it usually takes them about 5 to 6 months to really kind of get that stride. And that's if they're doing all of the marketing and sales material or activities at the same time. So it's kind of understanding that balance of what is your bottom line going to cost you, whether you're a nonprofit or a for-profit, right? Then on top of that, you want to think about, okay, well, what are my most important activities? Because a lot of founders are actually spending the majority of their time on activities that aren't generating revenue. So that's where you need to think about if you're thinking about HR or you're thinking about legal things or a number of different tasks that can fall on your shoulders. You have to think about, can I outsource those and focus more on, the revenue generating, or is your strategy going to be, I know what I'm stronger at? Because there's a lot of founders that might have a passion. If you're a baker, but you don't know anything about business, then, you have to kind of think about, well, what am I going to spend my time on, right? Or if you're in an IT field and you really understand the technology, but you don't know anything about marketing, you have to really understand kind of what are your strengths and weaknesses internally. And then you can start thinking about your hiring strategy. And again, depending on, your profitability and the money that you've saved, or if you've gone through a couple of seed rounds and have money at your disposal, first thing to think about hiring is, can I do an intern first? Because if it's like social media, you can outsource that to an intern and maybe turn it into an internship program with an MBA program or a college. It doesn't have to be someone who's low skill. Then the next step is going to, a consulting or a Fiverr or an Upwork, where you have like a short-term person where you can try it out and see what's the ROI or the return on impact of my investment. Am I actually generating more sales as a result of this hire? So I always recommend going those two routes first before you're thinking about a full-time employee, unless you're fortunate to have a lot of seed money where you can actually afford to bring someone on full-time.
That is such great advice. And I think many times we err on the side of moving too fast, too aggressively. Mm-hmm. Partly because we're afraid of burning out, partly because we're not sure, partly because people tell us that that's what we should do, or we think that that's what will make us successful. Mm-hmm. So the biggest challenges in terms of what do you see as the difference between not-for-profit versus for-profit as a startup? Because many things are similar, but what's different?
Yeah, I would say the biggest thing is what are you ultimately responsible for? So as a for-profit entity, you're responsible for making money. Even if you're socially oriented, like your bottom line is always going to be what drives your business. That's the reason that you're building this business. And there are things that you can do. Again, if you're a socially kind of oriented person, you can get a B Corp certification. You could do fair trade or direct trade if you're product-based, right? There are different things that you can do to show your commitment to sustainability. But again, the bottom line is the bottom line. When you're a nonprofit, then your responsibility is to your stakeholders or the beneficiaries of whatever activity you're performing. So it doesn't matter. You need to be profitable in that you need to be able to survive. You can't help them if you're not running. But ultimately, it doesn't matter how much of a profit you make, because you need to make sure that you're delivering impact. If you're a nonprofit who's promising to bring safe water to villages all over the world, but you're not doing that, then at that point, you're going to have a lot of issues and you're going to have to report to your board of directors. I think that's another big difference. As a startup, you can just start up your business by yourself and form an LLC and you're good to go. But if you want to form a nonprofit, you actually have to have a board of directors to be able to move forward. And they're going to be tracking your inputs and your outputs and ultimately what you're doing as a result of, the money that you're raising. So I would say, first of all, that's the biggest difference. I think the second thing is, again, it's still that same, doing that market research and understanding, if I'm a nonprofit, are there other nonprofits promising the same thing that I'm doing? Well, then what's my unique selling proposition? What makes my nonprofit different that's going to make donors want to give to me? So either way, it's understanding, your market research and understanding how you're selling yourself as a brand. And I think that that's a commonality across all of my clients, whether they're nonprofits or startups. It's understanding, how are you telling that story? What branding elements are you using to communicate that across all of your channels, and are they consistent? So I would say that those are probably the two biggest things that, regardless of your model, you need to, really make sure that you have a solid hold on before you're able to actually scale efficiently.
So, Celina, what do you see as the biggest needs of startup companies? What do they need most in terms of perspective or growth or their future?
Yeah, I think it depends on the founders, because again, depending on your founder skill sets or your founding team skill sets, that's what's going to change. So I've worked with companies who, they're a marketing team, but they don't know how to sell, or they don't know how to build the technology. Or I've worked with founders who, are really socially oriented, and maybe they come from a community and they're starting a nonprofit, but they have no business acumen. So again, the first, I don't think there's a blanket response. I think it comes down to the individual and understanding where they're at and looking at what are their skills and then where are the gaps. And that's kind of where we tend to lean in more in my kind of coaching or consulting methodology. But as a whole, again, I think it's really just overwhelm of understanding business as a whole, because most people that start businesses, if you have your MBA, you're normally going into corporate America for an executive level leader. You're not starting up a business. So there's a lot of people who aren't going in there because they want to start a business. They're doing it because they have a passion or because they see that there's a problem that needs to be solved. And they're going in kind of blindfolded, right? And not knowing anything. So it's really just kind of ramping up their learning and trying to understand all of the things that it takes to build a business, right? Because there's your financial, there's your legal structure, there's your marketing, there's your sales, there's your HR. There's so many things that you need to understand, and nobody has all of that together. So it's really just figuring out where they're at in that learning journey and trying to give them the information they need to make the best informed decision.
So you have an incredibly wide background, mm-hmm. and you've worked in a lot of different fields. So for you, who's your ideal client? What makes you wake up just passionate and excited to go to work?
Yeah, I mean, I think for me, it's people that are like me. I think that a lot of humans, just as humanity, we love seeing ourselves reflected, in other people. And so for me, when I see, when I started, I was more of a consultant. I was working with, nonprofits and startups who are already established, helping them solve a specific problem, whether that was creating an impact measuring framework, their social media strategy, creating content for them. And I still love to do that. But as I've gotten older and now that I'm kind of more established, I'm transitioning more into the coaching realm. And I love working one-to-one with entrepreneurs and kind of helping them figure out how to grow their business from a holistic perspective and kind of helping the person instead of solving one aspect of the business. And I think that I had to go through that journey and understand, from all of the different aspects, how do you actually solve those problems so that now I can take a step back and have it be kind of like a wider framework and saying, okay, like working on your entrepreneurial journey, where are you at right now? What are the questions that you have? These are the things that I've seen work in the past. Go do it yourself, then come back and let's talk about it instead of me actually doing it.
So as you work with people in that capacity coaching, there's so much variety, right? And so what do you think are some of the keys to success for a leader as they move into this startup role, mm-hmm. no matter whether they're in the for-profit, not-for-profit sector? What mm-hmm. are the keys to people's success?
Yeah, I mean, let's do 3 just to kind of keep it memorable, because human beings tend to remember things in sets of 3. I think the first thing is really combating this idea of entrepreneurial journey as something that's easy. I think, again, just being in social media, I feel like I see a lot of people kind of having like CEO life or work from anywhere lifestyle, and they make it seem like starting a business is just fun and just an easy thing to do, and I like to clarify right away, no, like this is the hardest thing you will ever do. You're never going to have peace. You're never going to not think about your business. It's going to be like having a baby, and if you're the type of person who has to start your own thing, it's a burning desire that you cannot not do, then you should go into this field. If not, if you're just kind of interested in it, then you can do it as a side business, but don't quit your day job. And that was something that as a performer, it was the same thing, because it is so gratifying if you are a natural born performer, and it makes all of the auditions and being broke and investing in school and constant rejection worth it for that one moment when you finally kind of get that goal. And I think entrepreneurship is the same thing. If it's something that you absolutely must do, then do it. But it's going to take you a lot of sacrifice, but it'll ultimately be worth it in the end. So I think that's the first thing, is kind of clarifying that misunderstanding that I think a lot of people who don't actually know it, or they just haven't done it like full time, spread, right? I think the second thing is understanding once you understand the commitment and kind of like how much time and energy it's going to take. The second thing is understanding humility and learning that every single day is going to be learning that you don't know how to do something, and you have to level up your skill set, or you have to ask for help. And if you're the type of person who doesn't like to do that, if you're someone who's like, yeah, no, I'm smart and I can do everything on my own and I'm a strong individual, like you're going to have to check that at the door, because every single day you're going to be reminded that you are incompetent in some way. And that doesn't mean that you're an idiot, and it doesn't mean that you can't do this. It just means that you're going to have to learn a new skill. So humility is another big component of being an entrepreneur that I think a lot of people have to understand, and you have to be able to take it with stride. If not, it's really going to break your spirit. I think a third thing is understanding how to work by yourself and be a self-motivator. Because I've seen a lot of entrepreneurs, and even, I've known people who were successful in business that they were actually, managers in large corporations and thought, I'm going to do my own thing and I'm going to make this work. And ultimately they failed because they were used to working with groups and with team members. And it's really different to work in a business that's running and to make improvements or changes or whatever with existing budgets and existing processes in place than starting something totally from scratch, where you might not have enough money. You definitely don't have anyone believing in you. You don't have a team to support you. So you have to be someone who's a self-motivator and who can, really plan and work well on your own and be productive without, the kind of safety net of having a team around you.
It's interesting that you say that, because I was just talking with a gentleman, Alex Sharfin, who has, he's done a lot of work with turnarounds in companies. And one of the things that he talks about is he breaks companies into different categories and levels. So he has sort of the startup, the in-between, and he moves up the ladder based on revenue. The interesting thing is he puts the entrepreneur at the very top of the food chain, because he says you have to learn all these other skills to really be successful at that level.
100%. Yeah. And
we tend to think of it as the opposite, where the entrepreneur is at the bottom and the rest are at the top. And I thought, that's a fascinating way to look at it, because suddenly it shifts what you feel that you're really responsible for. One of the things that you talked about is impact measurement. When you think about that and talk about that, what goes into that for you, and how do you approach that with companies? Because everybody wants impact. What does that mean?
Totally. So for me, impact, it can be a blanket term for sure for a lot of companies, but the ones that are truly impact driven, I think it comes into the core of their missions and values as an organization. And that's going to change based on, who they are. Some people really care about social impact. I spent a lot of time in my career working with fair trade coffee companies who really cared about their producers at the supply chain level. And so they invested in fair trade premium prices and fair trade, processes and projects to make sure that their workers were treated fairly. Then there's people who care more about environmental sustainability. So they're thinking about the inputs into the environment. I worked with a moringa company. It's a superfood. And they want to make sure that they have the best quality sourcing. And so they're investing in, organic agricultural practices and, vertical farms and all of these different things to make sure that the impact that they're leaving is better than, what they started with. Then you have different people as well who are looking at other types of conditions. It could be worker healthcare, or it could be worker safety. It can be female empowerment. There's so many different things. I think it just depends ultimately on what your impact thesis is. So instead of just kind of putting it on top as like a marketing tactic to be able to get people to buy your products, because consumers are increasingly more aware and there's ever more transparency every single day. And so they see through you if you're a company who really doesn't care and you're just trying to, charge more for a product or make a dollar. So I think it's really important that when you're doing your company strategy and building out your business, even if it's not in the beginning, maybe it's, you're 5 years in and you're like, oh, you know what? I think I need to kind of re-up my processes and we need to make this a focus on sustainability. Like that's okay. But you just have to incorporate it into everything you're doing. And so again, you start with, well, what are the metrics that matter? What's going to show that we're actually moving the needle within our company? So again, that could be if you are, again, fair trade coffee, it could be how much money is going to the farmers per pound sold. And you could be really open in that. Maybe you have an impact report that talks about how much more you're paying to your farmers. It could also be how much are they saving as a whole as a result of working with you? Were they able, I've seen, companies whose farmers have been able to build community centers or send their kids to college, or they pay for a doctor to be on site so that they have better health care, So it's measuring all those things. And normally when I work with companies as an impact consultant, I'll create a framework based on a couple of different things. There's something called the United Nations Sustainable Development Goals. Those have been very trendy, the UN SDGs in the impact measurement field. There's also something called the IRIS Impact Metrics, which is a whole metric framework that has hundreds and hundreds of different KPIs or key performance indicators that you can measure. And they give you kind of a starting point, and you can measure, every 6 months and kind of track over time how your impact is trending. So you can show, this is kind of what we did and this is the result that we've driven. Are you planting trees? Are you sending kids to school? Are you putting money towards, nonprofit organizations? It's just making a choice, about what you're going to measure, and then strategically measuring it over time, and then communicating that to your stakeholders. It can be in an email. It can be in a PDF that you post on your website. There's a lot of different ways that you can do that. One of my favorite projects as a consultant was I got flown to Thailand to do an impact report for a clothing company that had been fair trade. They'd been around for about 10 years, and they wanted me to interview all of their artisans to try to really triangulate what the impact had been of their business in these people's lives over a decade. So it was a mix of qualitative data, asking open-ended questions kind of about how you feel about the company, what has changed for you, what do you have access to now that you didn't in the past, et cetera. And then quantitative data, looking at the percentage, of artisans who have a home, who are able to, have a savings, who might have a car, and looking at those inputs 10 years ago, what they did and didn't have. And even looking at how many more artisan groups are employed now, because in the beginning, they were only employing one, and now they've got over 50. So when you quantify the amount of money that's going back to local communities, you can easily say, this is the impact that we generated with our purchases. We could not have done it without you, the consumers, buying. Thank you so much for being a valued partner in this impact journey.
Wow. That's amazing. I think there's so many people who want to have an impact. They don't measure it, unfortunately. They speak about it, but it doesn't have the same value, does it, as when it's actually measured and reported. Mm-hmm. So when where down the process does somebody begin to think about and talk about impact measurement? Is that when you're at about what size? Or is it the shareholders in a not-for-profit that drives you? Is it, in beauty and fashion, there has been so much with, is it, in a sense, slave labor, people who have been sold into manufacturing production? Mm-hmm. So, when is it that you begin to look at that and start to measure it?
Yeah. And so my theory is it's never too early. Again, it depends on what type of company you're building. And, nonprofits are not the only entities that are profit, are impact driven. Like I said, there's something called a B corporation where they're measuring your environmental impact, your social impact, but they're also looking at the impact within your organization. So if you're a late stage, bigger company and you're like, oops, I'm a little late to the impact bandwagon, and I'm service oriented, maybe they're not actually selling products, they're like, but I still want to showcase to the world that I care about impact. You can get certified with B Corp, and you have a third-party auditor come in, and they take basically a measurement of how good or bad your impact is, and they post it on their website, so it's public knowledge. In companies like Patagonia or Ben & Jerry's, I've seen law firms do it. So that's one way that you can do that. And even if it's later on, it's never too late and it's never too early. I think it just depends on you and what you care about as a company. But again, for me, the companies that I've worked with have all been mission-driven from the beginning. So that's why I'm saying they're either they want to do fair trade, whether that's in clothing, whether that is in their sourcing of their materials for beauty, like you said, or if they're a food company, they can do organic certification. You can do no GMOs. There are certain, in my opinion, this is not, the market, a thought, it depends on who you are. For me, if I, as a consumer, I'm vegan, if I see that a product's vegan, obviously, yes, I don't want to put animal products into my body, but that's not what's going to, inspire me to spend my money or not. What is going to be, are you doing direct trade sourcing? Do you have a fair trade certification? Are you organic? Because to me, that means that you're putting your money where your mouth is. Something like vegan to me can sometimes be greenwashing because it's or gluten-free. If water is gluten-free and you're just putting that on the label, obviously water is gluten-free. You didn't do anything extra to make it gluten-free. So that's what I'm saying. Consumers understand when you as a company are just trying to sell something or if you actually care. So that's why, again, it's, starting from day one, you can focus on your impact. And again, if you're a company who's been around for 5 years and you haven't up until now, but now you want to, then again, figure out what is your value proposition, what is your company motto, and what is going to fit into that. Don't try to artificially put something on just to be trendy. Actually look at your company values, because your consumers are buying your products because of those values. So your impact has to align directly with them, or they're going to sense that you're, full of it.
I think so much of what we're seeing is people are getting smart, and the way we advertise, people used to just kind of, you could say almost anything and people would believe it and they'd buy. Today, people are skeptical and cynical, and they go, "Oh, really?" And so to put something out there in a large way without having any proof really will do more harm than probably good, because it puts you into an unbelievable category.
100%. And that's why I am a big advocate of third-party advocators, or third-party parties, essentially, and auditors who are actually coming in. So that's where, again, my background was in fair trade coffee. So for me, I'm a big advocate of fair trade certification, because I've seen directly the organization, that nonprofit, their approach to certification and how strenuous they are. But then I've also seen in the field how coffee producers are immediately and directly impacted because of fair trade. So when I see people like Starbucks who have their cafe practices and they're saying, yeah, they're sustainable, but we're doing it on our own, I don't buy it. I think it's great that, you can show me an impact report of the things that you're doing. But for me, I need that third party, because again, it's like if I went to an employer and said, I'm homeschooled, but I taught myself an MBA, you can trust me, an employer is not going to buy that. They're like, well, no, I need to see a school certification, and I think that that's the same thing here. And again, Starbucks is so big and they are generating a positive impact. Don't get me wrong. I'm not trying to knock the company. I'm just saying that not a lot of companies can do that and get away with it. There's a danger if you try to just auto-certify or tell people to believe you just because you're doing it. I think it's better to invest some money to have a third party do it, whatever that certification is, whether it's B Corp, organic, fair trade, direct trade, whatever, have them come in and say something on your behalf. And that is what's going to generate that trust and ultimately those dollars from your consumers.
You know what, Celina, our time has gone so fast. Before we do close, I want to give you an opportunity to just share last thoughts that you have that you think are really important for our audience to know or to hear.
Yeah, thank you. I know this has flown by as well. It's been such a great conversation. I love talking about growth and the whole topic of building your legacy, I think, is so important, because so many people are afraid to build their legacy, or they think that they have to do it following a certain route. And I think that now more than ever with, social media and with a phone that is literally the world in your hand, you have so many opportunities to build your legacy however you want that to look like. I think it comes down to getting the education to be able to do that and having that belief in yourself, and even getting someone like a coach to support you. So I would just say, if you have more questions, if you want to continue the conversation, I've actually created different digital courses that will teach you either how to build a business, how to build a brand, how to market your impact. All of those are on my website that I'm hoping we can maybe link in the show notes here. Then I also provide coaching. So if you want to have more conversations or you need more help and guidance about how to, measure your impact or how to grow your business, I love talking to people, and I would love to enter into a conversation with you.
Perfect. So if you send us those links, we will make sure that they're in the show notes for you and for our audience, because I think more and more this is going to be one of the measurements. We've always looked at ROI, but we're also looking now more into social responsibility index as well.
Yes.
And if you don't have that, it does really impact your competitive edge. And I think more so as we keep moving ahead. So, Celina, thank you so much for your time and for your thoughts. And thank you all for listening to Building My Legacy podcast today.
You've been listening to Building My Legacy podcast with Dr. Lois Sonstegard. To book your appointment with Dr. Sonstegard, visit www.buildtomorrow.com.